Okay, so I finally managed to get my hands on one of these. That is the NVIDIA RTX 3080. Very, very hard GPUs to get hold of at the moment at the time of this video. I got it from a retailer, and yes, it is an expensive model, and that's why I wanted to review it to see the extra we pay here for the Gigabyte AORUS Master RTX 3080 with its 3-fan cooler, extra large cooler, the design of it, and that little LCD screen on the side. Is it actually worth going for over, say, the Founders Edition or other models out there? So we'll give you a very quick look here just at the box in detail. So we've got a 4-year warranty with this, which is great, but you must register on their website for this. So only the 10 gigabytes of DDR6X RAM with this. If you needed more, of course, the 24, then you got to fork out more for the RTX 3090, which I don't want to do because they're just ridiculously priced, and they do have, of course, the RGB. It wouldn't be a RTX gamer card, would it, without the RGB on here? And then quickly on the back of it, just to point out here are some of the features. So it's max covered cooling, and as you'll see, this thing is going to be huge. That LCD edge view screen, I'll show you that as well. So look at the thickness of this compared to my old, which I thought at the time was also very, very big. This is my GTX 1080 Ti. You can see a lot thinner than this one. So I will give you a rough estimate here on dimensions if you're trying to fit this in your tower, your case. You are going to need about 33 centimeters in length. The width of it is about, you can see here, 8. And then the height, that is approximately 14 you are looking at. So yes, I mean, you definitely might not be able to fit in some systems in some cases because of the length of this. So to quickly go over our features here, we've got a 100mm fan right here, 110mm, 2 of them, and they do spin in opposite directions. These ones, it looks like the blades are going to touch, but the way they're designed and cut. Now, the unique shape and design to these blades is supposed to cut down on the fan noise because they're not cutting there as much. They're slicing through it a little bit nicely to cut down on that noise, and just a very, very big cooler on this. So this part around the outside is a combination of both a plastic and the backing plate is metal, and I'll show you that shortly. So the copper transfer pipes, thermal transfer pipes there inside, you can see a few of them, and all of these fins just everywhere, keeping this card very, very cool. Looking down here inside, I can see they have used thermal pads up against a lot of the components inside, like the VRMs. So that is great to see. There's that backing plate, RGB right here. We have a bit of a gap here for ventilation. Now this metal backing plate, 100% metal, all of it, well, the whole part up to here. And just give this a bit of a flex too. Oh, that's not really flexing at all. That's good. That is so solid. And up the top here, we do have that LCD screen here, which is just very small. So it's only this little part here again, and we'll show you that later on this part. And it just lights up, and of course you can display things like the GPU temperature, custom text, or even a little logo if you wanted to for your build. So it's handy there. And this part, this is plastic. Overall, excellent build quality. It doesn't really feel cheap. We have the 2 power connectors, so these are 2 8-pin ones here. So that is even the same as what I have on my GTX there, you can see. So that's great. It means I don't need an additional PCIe power cable or anything that I need to route then through my Tower PC. Little switch here. So this is to toggle the silent mode. You can put that on by default. I think it's off. And that's to cut down on the noise of this particular card at the expense of having slightly higher temperatures. And in this in-depth review, I will cover the fan noise. I'll give you a sample of what it's like when gaming, and also monitor, of course, the temperatures, what you can expect out of this particular card. And lastly here for our ports, so 3 HDMIs and then 3 display ports. So that is giving us a lot there in terms of what we can connect up to this. And of course, HDMI 2.1 spec, we're able to run high resolutions, high frame rates there as well with this. So it will take up about 4 PCIe slots, whereas my old card, you can see this one would take up, with the thickness of it, was only about 3 PCIe slots. So there is a big difference there in just how thick these new GPUs really are. So you see it boots up with that AORUS logo. Team up, fight on, RTX 3000 series. A little nice animation. Bit of RGB there you can see with just this part here, because it's not all screen. The screen is only this little bit here. And here with the fans, you can see a little bit of the RGB lighting that it does have that you can adjust and change with the software. So let me just talk a little bit about the card. You're probably all familiar with this. So we've got 10 gigabytes of RAM on there. It is DDR6X, and this is the Micron brand. I don't know if they're using Samsung for other models, but we have Micron here. The bus width is 320-bit. If you want higher, of course, you need to get the RTX 3090. But for gaming performance, it's not actually that much faster. It's like 10% or something like that. It's not really worth it, and I think most of you out there will know that. So the stock clock is over the factory, well, what we get with the Founders Edition. This one is 1845, and I have safely run a boost clock of 1970 in total on the core. And what I've done here is I use MSI Afterburner, and I've set 125 megahertz more to the core clock. Now this will vary from card to card, but this is a kind of rough estimate that you could expect in performance-wise if you were to do a bit of an overclock here. I set the thermal limit to the maximum, which is 91 degrees Celsius. And the memory, I can overclock even higher than 800 megahertz. But once I start to go over about 800 or even 850, I'm getting no performance. In fact, losing a little bit there with the error correction on the RAM. That's just how it works out. But 800 is a sweet spot for me. I've been gaming on it for days, testing the stability. It is very good. Now, Gigabyte does have their own software called AORUS you can use to overclock, but I actually prefer MSI Afterburner. You can see there's the factory clock of 1845. Now, I've just run a couple of tiny benchmarks here just to show you roughly the performance you can expect. But first up, if you're interested in my system, I know some people may be, how does the Ryzen 9 perform? The 5950X is an absolute monster. Here you can see I did a bit of an overclock. This is what I'm running. It's 4.7 gigahertz with a voltage of 1.35. I could probably get a little bit lower on the voltage, but overall this is good for me. And when you take a look at just the performance here, you can see when you click on this, multi-threaded, even single thread, that this thing is an absolute monster. So one of the best CPUs at the moment to show off this particular graphics card. The multi-threaded score there from the CPU Z benchmark, looking really, really good. So stock here, graphics score, don't worry about the total score so much there, but our graphics score here, almost 18,000, as you can see. And then with that overclock, that then brings it up to 18,749. So you can get a bit of a boost. And we are talking not much. We're talking about 3-4% or so increase is what you're going to see in games. But on to now just a little bit of a test here in a few games to see how well this card performs. Cyberpunk 2077. A lot of people probably want to see this one. How does it perform on the RTX 3080 here? So settings. I have it on the graphics preset that is called high, well, ray tracing medium. We'll test that one first, and I won't be using ray tracing, I think, because I prefer a higher frames count for this game. And careful for spoilers, all right? This, I'm not hardly anywhere through the game at all. In fact, I've just started, okay? So it shouldn't be spoiling anything really for anyone, and I'm doing this intentionally. So this area right here, you can see we're getting about 50 frames per second with ray tracing at 4K. Not ideal, and when there's a lot of action going on, explosions here and fighting and whatnot, it will drop down into the high 30s. So really not ideal for 4K, such a demanding resolution there. Now if I set it onto the Ultra preset here, we'll see if that's going to make much of a difference. Ultra now, even worse, 35 frames per second, 33. Now I have applied that little tip to get all the cores working with AMD CPUs, okay? All the threads, all 32 of them. And it didn't really make much of a difference for me in terms of performance. And what about the setting that I will be running and gaming at is high, in fact, probably medium, but we'll try high now. So, okay, high, that hasn't applied, has it? We'll do that yet. No, it has. Okay, high setting is still not looking really that good. GPU clocks are good though, always over 2000 megahertz there. CPU is hardly being used, and thermal's good, 58 degrees there, maximum. So let's try now medium. Now my screen capturing is probably taking away a little bit of this performance too as well. So medium settings now, 50 frames per second. Oof. Let's have a look when I go into the bar here, how that is going to be affected. So 60 now, 59. All right, not amazing. Not amazing performance here. In 4K, this game is just so demanding. And if this was my GTX 1080, I'd be looking about 20 frames per second. So we're going to try it now. The low preset. Low preset, 60 frames per second here. And why not just go one more time, just up to the absolute highest here. Ray tracing ultra. See how this kills the card and the performance here. Ultra 46, huge hit there. And really visually, it's not looking that much better, and not least this area, to make it worthwhile. I'll just run upstairs, get upstairs here, and back out again, because that's where it's more demanding. 38 frames per second on Ray Tracing Ultra, super demanding at 4K. And Far Cry 5, this is 4K. Again, all of these games I'm testing at 4K at the high preset, and you can get an average of 85 frames per second. And just out of interest, I will run this same test, but high at 1080p, and we'll have a look at the result. You can see here the massive difference it makes. So at 1080p on the high preset, you get an average of 162 frames per second. Super smooth, really good performance. And the whole time the clocks were over 2000 megahertz, and the thermals well under 60 degrees Celsius. Shadow of the Tomb Raider, I set it to the highest preset. This is with DLSS off, and I got an average frames per second of 70 frames per second. So again, that's not going to match my refresh rate. If I want a game, really I have to stay to the lowest settings, definitely with this. And I'll do it one more time. I'm going to test out 4K just on the high setting. And the high setting 4K is an average of 79 frames per second here. And our thermals, so it will hover around 59 degrees to 60 degrees in my case. Ambient temperatures right here at 22.5 degrees. So the thermals are very, very good. This is with the overclock. Now, if I don't overclock, the maximum then will be about 59 degrees Celsius the whole entire time. Now, it is pulling up to a peak of 345 watts, so yes, more than the previous generations. My power supply is 850, and I'm looking at the wall power consumption of a maximum of about 510 watts to 490. So that is fine. It's not really stressing my power supply at all. I've got plenty of room there. That's good. But they do recommend having 750 watt power supply at least. Now, onto the fan noise and coil whine. Here is a sample of it under load. It's pulling about just over 2000 RPM. The fans and moderate noise, it's not really that loud at all. Okay, so the coil whine, you can't really hear it in that sample I gave you, unfortunately. Super minor. I only really hear that screeching, buzzing noise when I, for example, play Counter-Strike and just turn off any frame limiting or turn off any VSync, and then it's just roaring away with a crazy amount of frames per second. Then I will hear sometimes a bit of coil whine, but it's actually a lot better, the coil whine, than this one. So this is the GTX 1080 Ti that is being replaced. It's replaced now, it's out of the system, of course. And when I tried to play Cyberpunk with this, which used to be a really good GPU, but that was a few years ago now, I only upgrade really every 2 to 3 years. So I wait, but when I do upgrade, I tend to go large. It's now so much better with the RTX 3080 as expected. Now with my overclock, and not with some of the scores I showed you because I was doing screen capture at the same time, but with my overclock and looking at what the RTX 3090 is getting, I'm getting similar scores in games with the stock 3090s, that is. Now, the big question which I asked really in the start is the Gigabyte AORUS Master worth that extra for the LCD panel and the huge cooler? I mean, the cooling is great. It's not really going normally over about 59 degrees, sometimes 60, sometimes 61 degrees Celsius. So it runs very, very cool. The fan noise is good. It's very acceptable, and I can barely hear it over my normal typical system fans and the pump for the all-in-one cooler in there. But I really don't think it's worth it compared to other cards. You're paying extra for that gimmicky Gamer Bling LCD on there. Do you need the LCD? Do you really, really need it? If not, save yourself the money and go with something, say the Asus Tough Gamer RTX 3080 or one of the MSI ones, or even a Founders card, I think is better value for money. I mean, they still have pretty good cooling on them, don't they? And they look really nice. That's the best looking Founders card out there for the RTX 3080 compared to other Founders, say the RTX 2080. They're looking so much better, and they're still really, really good. So I would say save your money, and this card, only if you get it for a really good price, don't pay that extra, because I just don't think it's worth it. So thank you so much for watching this review of the Gigabyte, the RTX 3080 Aorus Master.